This week our theme is educational pathways in pharmacy. And in this module we're going to look at the evolution of pharmacy education. Now last week we talked about our pharmaceutical beginnings and kind of the history of pharmacy and its evolving scope of practice. And maybe you were thinking we were done with that history piece, but no. We're going to talk about history today. And actually throughout the course we're going to continue to think about some historical underpinnings of the things we're talking about. I happen to feel it's really important for a student in any discipline, whether it's pharmacy or anything else, to have a good understanding of kind of what's happened historically in their field. You know, how can we really understand why we are where we are and where we seem to be heading if we don't have some appreciation for what's happened in the past? So, having said that, let's talk about the evolution of pharmacy education. And you know, we've talked about the fact that pharmacy education and practice really evolved pretty dynamically during the 19th century. Starting in the early 19th century, we had an apprenticeship system really where pharmacists trained by doing the work of the practitioner with a skilled person in the field, entirely experiential with no classroom component. That evolved to the point where in 1821, we're going to learn in a few minutes, the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy was established. And by the way, this Philadelphia College of Pharmacy was not a college like we tend to think of it today. It was a college in the sense of a gathering of people, a gathering of colleagues who have the same purpose and intention in mind. This was established in 1821. And the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy, they started some evening classes to help apprentices get some better didactic training in addition to the important work in the field. That eventually became the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy like we think of it today. And of course we now have the requirement for Doctor of Pharmacy programs. We're going to learn more about that today, but we've really come, if you think about it, from a system of entirely being trained experientially to a doctoral program that in some cases is a post-baccalaureate degree. So we've come a long way. One of the things that I want to emphasize, I'm interested in trends in history, and one of the trends that always interests me is the dynamic between experiential and didactic training in this field. So as we just said, we've come from all apprenticeship training. We've kind of the pendulum swung to the point where we're almost all academic didactic training. And now, we have kind of a mix. So we're going to learn about residencies today. And we'll find that residency training, that's experiential training, very advanced. But that is becoming a much more important part of the landscape in pharmacy education. And as you'll learn also, the PharmD programs have a significant amount of experiential requirements. And these are called Introductory Pharmacy Practice Experience, or we call them IPPEs or IPPE, or there are Advanced Pharmacy Practice Experiences, APPEs or APPEs. So, experiential training is still an important part of this mix, and but the didactic training has become much stronger as well. Well, we just described the fact that the 19th century saw some pretty dynamic changes, and these changes in education we're going to talk about mirrored changes that were happening in practice, and we talked a little bit about some of those last week. The astute student who's watching and thinking about this field possibly for entry will understand how this has evolved and how it is evolving, because this kind of gives you a clue in terms of the kinds of things you need to be prepared to do in the future, and we'll continue to do that throughout this course. So as we've just said, we had apprenticeship training at the beginning of the 19th century. We saw the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy emerge in 1821, and then we saw some very significant fundamental changes in some underlying things that affected the educational system. One of them was the development of the pharmaceutical disciplines, and this mirrored what was happening in developments in biomedical sciences. Particularly chemistry for pharmacy was really fundamental to our early establishment of pharmacy curricula, as well as establishing a good research base in pharmacy. So think about the importance of chemistry, and some of you probably are out there right now taking general chemistry and organic chemistry, and maybe you're thinking, how can I get through this and get on to the other stuff? But understand the importance of that foundation for not only your training, but really for our field. So the pharmaceutical disciplines were much more developed toward the end of the 19th century. And we're going to learn in our next module this week about those disciplines a little bit more in detail. Some other things happened in the late 19th century that started to change things. We started to see state laws emerge requiring licensure. And we're going to have a a video module later in the course about these state laws, and we're going to actually have a visitor from our Board of Pharmacy who will tell you how those things emerged and how they are applied. It should be very interesting to you. But these state laws started to come about in the 19th century, late 19th century, and specifically requiring licensure for pharmacy practitioners. This obviously led to a great growth in our academic training programs, because in order to sit for the licensure, you needed to be well prepared. We saw the first graduates of a state-supported pharmacy college in 1867, Medical College of the state of South Carolina. And then the very next year, we saw the University of Michigan implement the first full-time pharmacy program that required no apprenticeship, totally didactic, in 1868. And then a little bit later, in 1892, the University of Wisconsin introduced the first BS in pharmacy program. At that time, it was 2 years of training, but it was a required baccalaureate degree in the field of study. Well, the 20th century was very turbulent in pharmacy education, and we're going to kind of talk you through that here in the next few minutes. Lots of change, lots of debate, lots of acrimony sometimes about what was the right thing to do. People still debating did we do the right things. And I'm actually going to ask you to think about a question related to that as we go into discussion forums this week. But let's think about some things that happened in the 20th century. Ohio State, where I happen to be sitting, was the first to say we want a 4-year baccalaureate program in pharmacy to be required in 1925. At that time, nationally, the requirement became a 3-year, it was called a pharmaceutical chemist degree. So you'll see all these different acronyms for our degrees in pharmacy. They were PHCs in 1925 by demand nationally. But Ohio State bit the bullet in 1925, said we want a 4-year baccalaureate program required. That became required nationally in 1948. And in 1960, we required a 5-year baccalaureate program to complete, to be prepared for practice. By the way, that's the degree I took. I had a 5-year baccalaureate program back in the 1970s, and we'll see how that has changed subsequent to when Ken Hale graduated. Well, I said that the 20th century was turbulent, and I'm going to start to paint that picture of why it was. You saw that in the early 20th century we started to see some movement in terms of requirements academically. And then this document that I have in my hand a copy of, called the General Report of the Pharmaceutical Survey, was published in 1950. There was a study commissioned by the American Council on Education in 1946 to take a look at this field of pharmacy, kind of a snapshot of the field, what pharmacists do and how that is evolving, and then what we need to do academically to kind of mirror those changes. Very important document. And I stopped in our library on the way to recording this module to pick up this actual copy of this book. I want to read one paragraph from it. So the book has lots of recommendations about education and practice and all those sorts of things. Let me read this one to you. It is recommended that the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, we'll talk about them more in a few minutes, and the American Council on Pharmaceutical Education, that's now called the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education, we're going to talk about them this week as well, that these two organizations take the necessary initial steps for the development and establishment of a 6-year program of education and training leading to the professional degree Doctor of Pharmacy. This program to include 2 or more years of general education and basic science training. So we had this kind of recommendation from the General Report of the Pharmaceutical Survey in 1950 that we ought to go toward PharmD programs. At that time they called them PharD, P-H-A-R-D, but we now call them PharmDs. Well, that created a lot of controversy, as you might expect. In 1950, the University of Southern California did that. They were the first to require a 6-year PharmD training. All the California schools followed that. And throughout the last half of the 20th century, we saw debate, we saw schools shifting that way, and slowly more and more schools became PharmD, but some were steadfast that we should have a baccalaureate degree in pharmacy, until the the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education issued their Standards 2000, which said that at the beginning of the 21st century, in the year 2000, the only accreditable degree program to sit for pharmacy licensure in this country would be the PharmD. That really was the tipping point. People really had no decision to make in terms of if you wanted to have your graduates eligible for licensure, you needed to do this. Didn't say they necessarily agreed with it, but it kind of finally answered that question. The debate essentially was over. Well, so now we are in a PharmD program, and we're going to learn a little bit more about what that means this week. But our pharmacy fundamental, one of them for today, is Doctor of Pharmacy. I want you to understand what that means, the PharmD program. This is the professional degree required for pharmacist licensure in the United States. 4 years of professional training preceded by a minimum of 2 years of pre-professional study. The PharmD degree must meet the standards of the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education. And let me say that, yes, we have certain standards that we meet through this group called ACPE. We have to have certain requirements and facilities and faculty and all these things. But there is much room for diversity yet among these programs. All PharmD programs are not the same. They put their own fingerprint on this curriculum, if you will. And they all have different prerequisites for getting in. Even courses you must take, even amount of training you must have. Some you can come in right out of high school into a 6-year program. Some require 2 years of pre-professional study, 3, or some schools like the one I'm in require a baccalaureate degree prior to coming into the doctoral program. There is much diversity among these programs still. And then I mentioned residency training, and we're going to talk more about residency later this week. But this is something you need to understand. A post-PharmD structured and mentored training program. They are called PGY1s, meaning postgraduate year 1 pharmacy practice residencies, which focus on kind of general pharmacy training. Or they are called PGY2s, which means postgraduate year 2, which typically focus on specialized training. I want you to really understand what a residency is as we go through this course. So here's the discussion forum question I promised. So, was the requirement of the PharmD degree for pharmacy practice in the U.S. a good move? I will tell you that academics and politicians and practitioners debated this kind of arduously in the 20th century. We now have it. It is the required degree. Was it a good move? I'd like to know what you think. So log in to the discussion forums and let's have some discussion. See you next time.